Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone to our October 31st Methods Mondays as part of our Methods Mondays series. This, I guess, is our Halloween Methods Mondays. So today we're very excited to have Dr. Sanya Badanjak here speaking with us. So I'll just quickly give a little bit of information about her background, and then she'll go ahead with her presentation. So Dr. Badanjak is a Chancellor's Fellow in Global Challenges at the University of Edinburgh School of Law and an affiliate of the Peace and Conflict Resolution Evidence Platform, or also known as PeaceRep, where she has been working as data manager for the PAX Peace Agreements database and Dataset. Her research interests include the applications of quantitative and text as data methods in the study of institutions, elections, and peace processes. She completed her PhD in political science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and holds an MA degree in political science from the Central European University and a BA in political science from the University of Zagreb. So welcome, Dr. Badanjak, and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Mike. I think, a special thanks also goes to Susan Allen. Mike and Susan and their colleagues invited me to speak to you today, and I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to tell you about my work and the work of the PeaceRep consortium a little. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Hopefully you will have my presentation on here now. Can you please? Yeah, it's there. All right. Yes. Very well. So today I'll be talking about our data collection efforts with a focus on documents as data, and then expand that into our variety of research methods that center around the concept of text as data. And in particular, I'll be talking about dictionary-driven measurement attempts and sentence embeddings via Google Universal Sentence Encoder. So to tell you a little bit about PeaceRep first, PeaceRep is a wide research consortium funded by the UK government and is rethinking peace and transition processes in light of changing conflict dynamics, changing demands of inclusion, and changes in patterns of global intervention in conflict and peace mediation processes. So the idea behind this research program is to support the reimagining of peace and transition processes through a range of traditional and digitally innovative research tools and projects. Apart from the University of Edinburgh Law School team, the consortium also comprises teams at the London School of Economics, St. Andrews University, University of Coventry, and other organizations such as Conciliation Resources and International IDEA. At the University of Edinburgh, the core work is centered around digital innovation and peace analytics with a base in the PAX, Peace Agreements database. So what is the PAX Peace Agreements database and dataset? It's the largest collection of peace agreement texts that we are aware of. We currently hold a database of 1,959 peace agreements and counting, because we are expanding the data and we are hoping to keep on updating the database until 2026. The database is currently covering around 150 peace processes, and the data start in 1990 and are current up to June 2022. The PAX database also comprises two sub-databases which focus on particular subsets of issues. So we have PAX Gender that goes into more depth on issues related to women, girls, and gender, and PAX Local that digs deeper into issues surrounding local peace agreements. The database is online and available at peaceagreements.org. And it's available as I said, an archive of agreement texts, as a data set of fully coded data provisions, and a corpus of agreement texts. So all agreements in the database have been digitized, translated into English, and human coded for content of 260 substantive categories. So essentially that means you can go to the peaceagreements.org website. You can search the database for substantive issues, countries that you're interested in, and then download the data on agreements that are of interest to you. The PAX local and PAX gender databases are slightly different from this main data set. So for instance, the PAX local database has more detailed geocoding. It has more detailed coding of third parties and mediators and facilitators, but is also compatible with the main database of these peace agreements that we hold. The PAX gender database is very similar again, except that, as I said, it sort of digs in deeper on the issues of women, girls, and gender in peace agreements. Now, the main database and the sub databases can be used in conjunction with one another in whatever format of export is interesting. So it can be a comma separated file, PDFs of original agreement documents, or a corpus of agreement texts. Now, when we have started sort of working on publicizing the PAX Peace Agreements database, we sort of didn't really realize it at the time, but we were really working towards making the PAX data fair. So based on the Wilkinson and others definition from 2016, where the purpose of the data is for it to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So when I say that, the important thing is for the data to be fair, I mean that we want everyone to be able to find our data. So we developed a website. We spent a decent amount of time on search engine optimization, and we have made sure that the data have been properly archived and can be easily referenced. The data are also accessible in the sense that we provide plain text of these documents. We provide a variety of data formats and a variety of search options for a variety of research requirements. Interoperability and reusability of these data have been slightly more complex. So interoperability, as we understood it, is making sure that the PAX peace agreements data can speak to other data sets that are out there, particularly some of the more commonly used ones, such as the UCDP conflict data program universe of data sets and the peace accords matrix data. Both of those, for instance, are sort of reference and sort of colleague data sets to ours. And we wanted to make sure that anyone who's interested in research on peace and conflict can use these data sets together and in a way that complements and in a way that allows these to complement one another. Finally, reusability of the data is something that we've spent quite a lot of time on and still continue to work on quite a bit. So this is about anticipating user needs and a variety of research aims and methodologies. So when this, when I joined this project, I was political scientist joining a team of legal scholars, of anthropologists and ethnographers, and our aim was to make sure that the database and data set can serve qualitative, quantitative, text as data, legal research. So a variety of ways of exploring peace processes and peace agreements. Now, in this first part of the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about the data challenges. I hope that will be of use, as well as specific research methods that we use to analyze the data. Good quality data are, after all, at the center of any analysis. that one can do. And so the key issues that we have found in the PACS data production process are related to scope, so what gets included in the database. Second, in the process of turning documents into data. Third, in technical issues, storage, organization, backups, so on. And finally, ethical concerns surrounding the data that we collect. And so I sort of hope that by telling you about some of the quandaries in the resolution of specific problems that we've had here can sort of leave you with a sense that our data are in fact reliable, and that therefore the research methods that we employ are all the more suitable because they're based on data that we hope are of high quality. So the first concern is what's an agreement and what fits into this PACS peace agreement database. So the first set of criteria relates to what kind of document we need to look at. So these documents need to be formal, written, signed, and they need to be publicly available. In terms of content, they need to be contributing to conflict resolution in an armed conflict or a violent crisis. So this means that a document really has to have some relevance to a peace process. It cannot just be a statement by the warring sides, and it cannot be just a sort of well, for lack of a better term, it cannot be without commitments, right? So as long as the sides are committing to some action that contributes to resolution of a conflict or a violent crisis, and they do this in a formal, written, signed, and publicly available document, these documents can then be part of the database. Now, we collect documents that have been made publicly available since 1990, and this also means that there's a sort of time gap between when an armed conflict takes place and when an agreement is signed. So we determine a 50-year maximum gap that's allowed in the data for agreements and conflicts. So for instance, one of the largest gaps that we have between agreement and armed conflict is related to a 1991 agreement that effectively resolves some issues of the Second World War and relates to the reunification of Germany, right? Essentially, these matters of definition and scope have been at the core of the work. So we have tried very hard to record these decisions, particularly those that relate to scope. And we have been collecting also these excluded borderline documents, so those that don't quite make it into the database, but we sort of keep them on our database backend. And I think my hope for the coming year, maximum 2, is to have a data set of these sort of borderline items. So in case researchers are interested in these additional documents from peace processes, they might be able to access these as well. Now, the second group of problems in sort of turning documents into data relates to reliability and validity of the measure. So on the one hand, how do we know that our data are valid, that they do in fact relate to the concepts that we claim they do? And how do we know that our coders have done a good job linking the two? So when it comes to validity, we've been trying very hard to make sure that we compare the PACS data with alternate measures. And here, considering, for example, the UCDP peace agreements data set as this sort of alternate measure has been immensely useful. Because, for instance, if the UCDP data say that a particular agreement contains, say, a reference to gender, and our coders haven't found it, then that's a problem for us to resolve and explain, right? So that is sort of one of the core ways of ensuring validity. But when it comes to reliability, on the other hand, we've really relied on coder expertise and trying to have as long-term a perspective as is possible. So the coders working on understanding PACS data and sort of turning these documents into a quantitative data set have all been extensively trained and have been part of the team for a longer period of time. Most of them are also experts in their fields, so they are PhD candidates or research associates with master's degrees in political science, legal studies, and similar. An additional mechanism for ensuring reliability have been extensive coding discussions and double coding. So coding discussions mean something like, if I'm not sure whether this particular segment of a peace agreement really refers to power sharing, I take it to a coding meeting and we discuss whether this is in fact what I think it is. Double coding is, of course, a standard approach where multiple coders code the same text for content, and we check to see if the instructions are good enough, if the coders are agreeing, and so on. And finally, the mechanism that further supports the sort of reliability and validity of the data, so determining whether the content of these agreements is indeed what it is a Q&A mechanism in the data input tool, where if coders have a question, it directly goes to the project PI. That's Christine Bell, who can then reply to the coders directly from her email, which is also a very nifty feature to have. Now, an additional set of concerns related to turning documents into data is that of processing text. And I think this is something that should not be understated. A lot of our work and a lot of the funding that's available for this research program goes towards processing text. So this is about digitizing documents, about translating documents, and then making sure that the training and manuals and expertise required for coding the content of the agreements is all in place. Finally, this is also related to entering data into a data entry interface. Now, the translation and digitizing of documents have been particular concerns, and and I think this is a particular lesson for anyone considering a research project that entails turning documents into data. So oftentimes the documents we get are like the one that you can see on the presentation here. So for instance, this is a handwritten agreement between armed groups in the Central African Republic. So this document not only needed to be scanned, but also needed to be translated and sort of made sort of machine readable. And the costs of this, I think, are something to always that should always be considered in planning research that turns documents into data. An issue that I think maybe we should be talking about a bit more, in particularly in the area of data collection and providing data sets to the research community, is that of ethics of secondary data collection. So some of the issues that we've encountered include the naming of specific persons in agreements. In our cases, a lot of the time, these would be cases where victims and perpetrators of violent crimes have been named in agreements, in which case we are faced with the problem of our amplification of these documents. So a lot of the documents we have were publicly available, but intended for a much smaller audience than a global peace agreements database is. And we are often wrestling with the problem of, is this, even though this is publicly available and someone put it on Twitter and it's made available in a local newspaper, is it a problem for us to amplify this document, and particularly in cases when there's named persons in the documents. Finally, the concern that we've had on this research program has been that of systematizing data and then making it publicly available. So it is possible, for instance, that if we track, say, agreements on humanitarian access over a particular space and over a specific time period, this data systematized can make can provide additional information to the warring sides that maybe they didn't have before. Now, there's really no good solutions for this, but these are issues that do deserve consideration, and I think on the PACS database we do try to give them our time and effort and thought whenever we add a new document to the data set. I'm going to skip over the technical and IT concerns, but I'm happy to talk about these later on. I'll tell you a little bit about the plans for the PACS agreements database, and I'll move on to the rest of the research methods that we use with our peace agreement texts. So as I said, we're looking at PACS updates until 2026. Hopefully our research funding will allow for that. I also already mentioned that I'm hoping that these borderline cases, so those that did not make it into the database but were seriously considered, will also be published with the next release. There's an actor level data set in progress, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that because it's also based on our text as data applications. The hope for the coming versions of the dataset is also that geocoding will be improved and that accessibility will be improved, both in terms of user experience and actual availability and accessibility of data formats. One big chunk of the work that we're currently doing relates to what I like to think of as adventures in automatic and hybrid coding. So I already mentioned that the PACS data set has more than 160 categories, ranging from anything, like mentions of women, commitments regarding ceasefires, commitments regarding transitional justice, agreements regarding setting up central banks. And this is a lot of work for researchers on the team. So we're hoping to speed this up a little by using some automatic coding. But I'll tell you a little bit about that in just a second. I'm going to pause for 10 seconds just to see if there's anything I can do about these marks that have appeared on the screen there. I think I've erased them now. Okay, so now onto the actual research methods component of the talk today. So a large chunk of what we are currently working on and are hoping to expand on in the coming years of the research program has to do with converting these documents into machine readable text and then treating this text as data. So what you can see here on this slide is a very sort of basic attempt to assess the content and describe the peace agreements that we have in the PACS collection. So on the one side, you see a sort of network of the most commonly used terms, and on the other is a simple word cloud noting the most common words in peace agreements. While this is very useful to get a very quick sense of what the data entail, we are working on some more complex projects relating to this, and I'll tell you about 3 of those. So first, I already mentioned that we're hoping to expand the PACS data by providing data at individual actor level. So at this point, the peace agreements data are at agreement level. So for every peace agreement that's signed and in our collection, you can see what the parties have committed to. However, the problem with that is that agreement signatories are not always the same as conflict actors. Sometimes agreement signatories are much broader than that. Sometimes they're more narrow. oftentimes some conflict actors are excluded from some agreements and they're included on others. And so we cannot assume that an agreement relating to a conflict also refers to all the warring sides or interested parties in this conflict. Hence, the PACS signatories and commitments dataset, where the ambition is to be able to show for every armed group, international organization, or country serving as a third party, the sort of documents and particular matters in these documents that have been committed to via their signature. And the way we're doing this, we're using existing PACS coding and agreement text. We are applying named entity recognition procedures combined with human coding and cleaning to first get the full set of named actors in peace agreements. So we're starting with international organizations, armed groups and governments, and we're trying to create a data set sort of near automatically that will show how that will show who signs what and when. And this is also a data set, hopefully that will give us a better starting point for thinking about agreement commitments in dyadic terms, as opposed to sort of starting with agreement as a unit. So this was the first application of our text as data methodologies. And again, I'm happy to answer more questions about this later on. Now, the next set of methodologies that we're using are related to sort of supervised text modeling techniques. The idea with these is, for instance, to provide alternative measurement for concepts that we often work with. So in one example, I told you already that the PACS provides a sort of sub-data set on women, girls, and gender. However, this data set is very much focused on items agreed, as opposed to a general sort of tone and a general orientation towards matters related to women, girls, and gender. And so what we are able to do, because we have these agreement texts, is derive a dictionary of terms related to women, girls, and gender. So for example, this is something like, you know, from your very basic ones, right? Women, girls, but also things like education for women, feminism, women's groups. So a dictionary of about 100 terms related to the topic, which is then used as a basis for scoring all agreements that we have in the PACS database. So this alternative measure then allows us to sort of maybe better capture this broader tone of the agreement as opposed to specific commitments made in the agreement. The measures are not identical, though they are decently highly correlated. The idea here is, though, that you know, we always want alternative measures. It's always important to get a good sense of how different concepts can be measured, what the particular nuances involved are, and then, of course, using these in statistical models in particular can be very beneficial. So again, this is an application of supervised topic modeling research. Now, moving on from that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our work on semantic similarity models. And this is the work that the University of Edinburgh PeaceRep team has done with Roy Gardner, who is our external consultant on this issue. So we have been working on a series of semantic similarity models that are based on Google's universal sentence encoder. Now, the idea behind these methodologies is that every sentence can be encoded on as a sort of vector of values. And every sentence will have a specific vector that will help us identify semantic similarity between a given text and an analyzed text. The models are based on sort of trained on sort of vast collections of texts that Google was able to rely on. So this is text from Google Books, from Wikipedia, from news articles, and so on. So essentially, the model learning was done on the Google side, and we are able to use this model to identify similar text. So we can say, provide a sentence about climate change, and then seek the most similar sentences to the sentence that we have provided. Now, possible uses for this include automatic coding. So we can, for newly added agreements to our data set, we can set some automatic coding parameters and help our human coders do the job more efficiently and quickly. This can be used in process tracing, particularly in cases of peace agreements and constitutional changes sort of following on from one another. And this is one strand of the work that we are developing. We are able to use this for discovery of relevant data sources. And this is particularly important when we consider something like agreement implementation. So currently, I think Roy is working on trying to identify relevant components of OSCE ceasefire monitoring reports in Ukraine and match the components of these reports to particular sentences from the ceasefires signed in the Ukrainian conflict. Finally, because these similarity models allow us to sort of group documents in various ways, we can then also use them to expand our understanding of scope of particular agreements. So I'm going to quickly show you a couple of examples of this. So first, we have this. We have built a user interface for automatic coding, and here's the example of the climate change sort of prompt that I provided to our collection of peace agreement texts, where I wrote a very simple set of terms that looked to me related to climate change, and the model identified the most similar sentences from the PAX peace agreements database agreements, right? The next case is an example of Roy's research that comes from Sudan and the negotiations on the joint declaration on the two areas, that is Blue Nile and South Kordofan. So the agreement was, the agreement between the two sides here was negotiated over a series of drafts. We were able to get these different drafts and then track every sentence from the original to the final version of the text. And similarly, every sentence from the final version back to the original, and see, in essence, which sentences stayed, which sentences moved, and which were sort of changed so much that they didn't really resemble their original at the end of the negotiations. Right, so I'm going to wrap up here, and I know this has been a lot. So thank you so much. You can see more about this work at peaceagreements.org, where the peace agreements data are, or at PeaceRep.org, where the work of the entire research consortium is featured. So thank you so much. I will now stop sharing and happily take any and all questions.
Great, thanks so much for that, Sonia. That was a great presentation. It seems like a really important tool that you've been working on developing. So, and I think it's something that will be really exciting and useful for both faculty and students at our school who are interested in these agreements. I will maybe start with one question and then we can open it up to others. So if anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. But I'm curious, so, you were taking in actual text from peace agreements and coding it, and then, so you have potentially a mix of qualitative and quantitative data there that are available. So is ultimately what's made available in the data set kind of summary quantitative like statistics about the agreements, or is there also are there also ways for people to analyze qualitative data within the text, or should they do that on their own? I'm just curious.
Right, so maybe I'll just start with that. So I think I would say both are available, though I think with some caveats, right? So because the data are both coded sort of numerically and qualitatively, you can access both. So for example, when you go on the search tool for PACS, you can search, for example, for elections, right? And the search result will give you the text of all provisions in all agreements related to elections. You can export this as a PDF, and then that can be used for qualitative research. And we've had colleagues use it that way, and it's been quite effective. Now, the one thing that we don't provide publicly, but I'm actually very happy to share this if anyone needs it, is this similar output in a comma separated file, which can then be easily imported into something like NVivo or Deduce, and then you can do this sort of thing where you have all text of all provisions concerning elections in all countries since 1990, and then you do your work, right? So one of our project colleagues has employed this for her research project on victims and how victims are accommodated and dealt with in peace agreements. So multiple entry points for the data.
Great. Yeah, that's awesome. Super interesting. It looks like we have a couple questions. So Benjamin.
Hi there. Hi, thank you very much. My name is Benjamin Petrini. I'm a research fellow with the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and I work in the Conflict, Security and Development Program. Thank you very much for presenting this work, and it's great to learn and hear about this. I'll ask a question that sort of relates to a current project that I'm doing, and to hear from you if this type of data could be helpful. I'm doing work and research on the extent to which conflict has become more protracted in the last decade or so. And obviously, one of the measures to measure that is the implementation and the collapse or the collapse of peace agreements and peace processes, or the extent to which a peace process did not result into a peace agreement. So I'm wondering if this data set in the current form provides some measure of that, of peace agreements, if they have collapsed or not, or peace processes that have not yes had an agreement as an outcome. And any reflection you have on that will be great. Thanks so much.
Shall we take one more, since there's another hand, and then I can do both?
Sure, Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Jeff Helsing. I'm the executive director of the Better Evidence Project here at the Carter School. And what you've developed, you and your colleagues, and its scope is quite both extensive and very impressive. I wasn't quite sure how long everything's been up and running completely. I know you're expanding it, but I guess I wanted to ask you about your experience with the users you have what kind of feedback you've gotten, and how it's being used and is part of what you have presented about where you're going in the future a response to sort of how it's being used, how the resources are being used, how the data is being used, and what the user experience has been. And based on that, have there been any surprises or new are you framing or sort of creating this in any different ways based on who the users are and how they've been using it?
Right. Thank you. Thank you both so much. I'll just start with the first question. And this one is really, really hard because we have found that it's near impossible to have a shared standard for failure of agreements. Right. So for two reasons. So one has to do with the nature of the data here in PACS. So in PACS, we collect all agreements that fit the criteria, and oftentimes these are fairly small, narrow agreements. We collect a lot of sort of process and pre-negotiation agreements, local agreements, ceasefires. Now, for ceasefires, it's somewhat, more straightforward to have a measurement of failure. And I think folks are doing this quite a bit. For sure, Govinda Clayton's project, Govinda and colleagues, that is, project on ceasefires, I think it is now, moving quite a bit in the direction of better understanding when ceasefires are violated. But for us, because we have such a wide range of documents, it's very hard to have a simple shared sort of measure of failure or success. That's a really, really difficult one, right? I should also say we do not have a measure of success or failure, and we have, well, my instinct for sure has been to try to make the data better interoperable, to be able to match them to other data sources, because I don't think that we can have a very straightforward way to just say, this failed, this worked. It's better to make the data interoperable and try to triangulate with other sources, UCDP data, conflict events data, or any other indicator for implementation or some sort of substantive piece. Yeah, that's a really, really tough one. There is also one thing that I wanted to mention on your question about the sort of protracted conflicts and whether they've become more difficult to resolve in the recent years. So one of the things that I looked into a couple of days ago in the PACS database is the ratios of the agreement types that we have. And one of the things that I've seen and was quite surprised by for the last 15 to 20 years is pretty much a collapse in the numbers and proportions of agreements that deal with process and negotiation. So the agreements that say, this is how we're going to talk, these are the issues that we're going to put on the agenda, this is where we're going to meet, this is how we're going to do this, and these have collapsed, right? So all other agreement types in other types of conflicts are more or less steady, but these sort of process and pre-negotiation deals are a dying breed. And I don't know if this helps, but I think it sort of goes quite a bit towards the sort of understanding the protracted nature of many conflicts. On the other question, thank you so much for asking about our users, because that's a very it's a complicated and exciting area. So we have, I think, so the website and the first release of data were made publicly available in 2018. So it's been a couple of years now, but I think with every release, we've tried to do something new and something a little different. We've had quite a bit of feedback from users. So the really interesting thing for us has been that I think we really have been able to reach multiple audiences. So on the one hand, the quantitative data set is now getting used quite a bit in quantitative research and political science in particular. And I think I'm quite happy about how this has gone. But the database itself has also sort of seen use from anyone involved in active negotiations. So mediators, facilitators, diplomats, and members of armed groups themselves. So we've had several cases where people would be in negotiations and would sort of, think about, we have this problem, how have others attempted to address it, and actually relied on PACs to sort of look at the variety of solutions to problems that appear across contexts. And that is, I think, quite a, I don't know, I think of it as something that on our end, we are very proud of. The work has also been used, I would say, quite a bit in international organizations and by governments. Now, the thing that we have learned from all of this is that we've been less than successful at catering to these audiences. So this is one thing that I never expected as a sort of, researcher predominantly. The sort of work that we will have to do with user interface designers and user testing groups to sort of understand who accesses what data in what way. So one of the things that we're hoping to do in the coming years is make it a bit easier for researchers to just download the data they want, and make it a bit more straightforward for qualitative researchers and diplomats and mediators to sort of get a sense of what the data are. Our search mechanism at this point is a little too complicated. There's a lot of things on the website, and that's one of the things that we've learned, that researchers are not necessarily good at presenting data to the world.
Great. Well, thanks so much for sharing more information in response to those questions. I see Susan has a question and has been able to join us, which is great.
Hey, yeah, thank you.
Hi.
Really appreciate your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, I'm thrilled you could make it. And really learned a lot from sorry I came on a bit late, but really learned a lot from the latter half of your presentation. So I wanted to ask you, since we have some of our graduate students online and we're recording this and we'll share it with other graduate students, are there any visions you have for certain research that really needs to be done and hasn't been done yet? So people who are looking for ways to engage with the database and all the resources you're offering, do you have suggestions for people who are looking for a research topic? Thanks.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts on this. So one of the first things that I would want to say is there's a lot of questions that remain about the nature and changes to peace processes. And that's also an area where more data is sorely needed. So we like to think of PACs as a peace processes data set and database, but really what we're missing are the negative cases. So the instances of negotiations that did not yield anything, any written formal agreement, and having better data on peace processes that failed would be really important. So this is something that we're working on, and hopefully we'll have a better sense of this, of how this could be constructed in the coming year or two. But if anyone's looking for a good PhD project, I would say negative cases of peace processes would be it. The other thing I think has to do with third-party involvement beyond agreement signatories. So something like who was present, who was financing the talks, things like that. I think there's quite a ways that we can go to move beyond just who was in the room and who signed. So this sort of understanding of all the influences, be it who's funding or who's protesting in front of the door, is really important. I always think of I don't know if you've come across this book by Eileen Tripp on women and political power in post-conflict Africa, where she describes several prominent cases of women's organizations influencing peace talks, and doing so in cases when they were explicitly not invited to sit at the table. So I think that type of work is also very interesting. And another thing has to do with the methods. So because our ability to do research computing has exploded effectively, there's a lot of text out there that could be used but still isn't being used. And we, I, both as a team and myself as a sort of single person sitting in front of a computer, I come across these massive resources of text and think, oh, if only I had a bit of time to collect, digitize, and analyze. And I think looking at those types of data resources is really important.
Great, thanks for that. And it looks like we have a question from Raju. Would you like to unmute and ask it?
Thank you so much. This is Raju in Colorado, Global Mediation Team. I appreciate the conversation. It's wonderful. Simple question. I know this week is the Geneva Peace Week.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been any opportunities to interface with some of the organizations that are working out at Geneva Peace Week?
I don't know. I have to be honest. So the project PI, Christine Bell, I think has been away last week, and I think this might be one of the things she was doing, but I'm not sure. So we tend to sort of split up some of the sort of outreach and data work, and only sort of convene all together sort of periodically. So I don't know, I'm afraid. But I would hope that someone has been working on this. So one of the things that we've been trying to do in the research program is to sort of try to have a team where we focus on our comparative advantages. So sorry, but I can follow up if this is really useful for you for your work.
Thank you so much. I'll check and see, and I appreciate you. I appreciate that answer. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any other questions from people in the audience?
Actually, Mike, I have one question just to make sure I understood you, Sonia. Partly because at the Better Evidence Project, we're creating a big resource center. We want to connect people to databases, so we will certainly do so with your database. But you mentioned that you don't really have, if I understood you, you said you don't really have a measure of success or failure. And then you, in answer to Susan's question, you said we need more research around failed cases. And so are you ultimately looking to, through the data accumulation, developing a measure of success or failure? Is that one of the long-term goals by 2026? I wasn't sure I fully understood the first thing you said and then the later thing you said.
Of course, because I wasn't clear. Sorry about that. So there's two different kinds of failure here, right? So one is the instance of armed groups, conflict parties getting together in negotiations and failing at producing a peace agreement of any sort. So be it a ceasefire or a comprehensive deal. So that's one kind of failure. And the other kind of failure is once they have managed to agree on something, the failure of that and a return to fighting and recurrence of conflict. And so my answer about, more research on failures was predominantly oriented towards these failures of peace talks to produce an agreement, because these are the cases that are very hard to find and hard to track comprehensively over time and over, different contexts. But failures of peace agreements should also be better understood, because this is probably one of those Tolstoy type stories where, every failed peace agreement and peace process is painful and terrible in its own way.
All right, and we've got 2 minutes left, but maybe we can squeeze in another question from Ziad.
Hi, Sonia. This is Ziad Ashkar, also from Better Evidence. Very interested in the project and very interested also in the work on the latter part where you're talking about the semantic symmetry analysis, the automated processes. And one of the things that I'm working on a project with a professor, we're doing this semantic analysis of thousands of text. One question I have for you is your model able to do text analysis that is not in English? And then I guess the secondary one would be then, are all the agreements in the database purely in English, or are they also available in other languages, in the original language, potentially, of the agreement?
Yeah, right. So I can do a very quick answer to this one and hopefully stay on time. So the semantic analysis relies on Google's Universal Sentence Encoder, and that's available in, I think, 16 languages. So it would, I think it does certainly allow for analysis of text in French, Spanish, Chinese, and others. So it is possible. The PAX database collects agreements in whatever their original language is. The problem with that is that the original language texts are typically in a non-machine readable PDF format. So we do have them, they are available. You can sort of click on original language text and get the PDF, but machine readability is poor to non-existent there. So what we do have are agreement texts translated into English, and then these are fully digitized, machine readable, and so on. Yes, this is a concern. We don't really have a good way to solve it at this point.
Great. Well, I think we're just on time here to end, but thank you so much for this presentation. I was just reflecting on this in the context of the broader series that we're doing of Methods Mondays, and the purpose, or the main purpose of this series, is to expose graduate students at our school to different types of methodologies and tools they can use for their own research. And I think this is a really valuable one, because I think one of the hardest things, to do when you're starting out as a student is to sometimes find data to use, because if you don't have resources, you can't go collect your own. So I think this can be a really valuable tool for students who are, even early on in the program, looking to start applying some data analysis skills, or even to use for their dissertations, etc. So I think it's really exciting, opportunity. And even though we don't have all of our students here, well, at least now we can. Those of us who are here are aware of this tool, so we can refer to people to it as necessary, and also we'll have the recording. So thanks so much again.
Thank you. That's very, very kind of you to say. And thank you for the invite. I'm also happy, if anyone has further questions or wants to further chat about this, for folks to get in touch. And yeah, I'm always happy to talk about this.
Great. Well, with that, I guess we'll let everyone off to have their lunch.
or in my case, I'll go prepare for trick-or-treaters.
Yes. Yeah, we'll be doing that later. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
See you.